right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Startup Fuck Up. Today we have an interesting topic to discuss. I think it's especially relevant in this day and age with all the startup porn that's coming up and around, with how businesses are operating, the culture behind them, and especially I want to focus today on the topic of hustle culture and how it breeds stress and burnout. So I have today a fellow UBC alumni, Sayata Gabriel. So Says for short, I guess, Say. Yeah, and she would like to share a bit about her experience in and around her own personal journey of mental wellness and health, and also what she's doing with her organization, Grow Mighty Leaders. So Sayata, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, kind of what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I think, as you said, there is a huge need for this right now. I realize that my own experiences that brought me here were in some ways like the front of a wave. And now I look around just a few years later and I see a lot of people struggling with stress and burnout because hustle culture, sold us a lie, which is that if we just push through and push through, we'll succeed and get stronger. I think that this is easy to confuse with taking action, even when it's uncomfortable. I know I confuse those things, and I've always been a creature of action. But, I spent years trying to live a stress-free life only for my entire body to basically break down and to realize that I was not being successful. Anyway, in a sentence, I think what brought me to where I am today is being willing to not just learn to take action, but also learning to understand where my limits are. That was not an easy task. So it's something that's definitely still ongoing.
Great. Maybe tell us a bit about kind of your personal experience around stress and burnout. I think we talked a little bit about that kind of the pre-interview, but I'd love to get the audience and the listeners to better relate and understand kind of what kind of situations you went through, which I'm sure a lot of other people go through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is intrinsically tied actually to Grow Mighty Leaders, which is my company and my love now. Really, like many others, as I mentioned, I was pushing through, and I really did not want to necessarily see myself as busy and stressed all the time, but it just kind of felt like that's what life demanded of me, especially as my first startup, my business started to grow and get more established, and I had a team and all this stuff. I had kind of thought of it like an addiction to stress, and that it was something that I just needed to kind of overcome through sheer force of will, like just will myself to not be stressed. And then one day my body shut down. And I say one day, but the truth is that there had been things going on for a long time that I'd been kind of half aware of or ignoring in my body, my own exhaustion, emotional and physical, really not sleeping well, not getting more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep of a night, and having been a really strong sleeper just a few years before that. I had all the knowledge. I had like researched and, studied conflict resolution and this and that and all the information, but it had basically just turned into more on my to-do list, more fueling my sense of shame, more fueling my revenge bedtime procrastination, where I was like, gosh darn it, I don't want to go to bed, even though I know it's bad. But to wake up one day and to basically not really be able to move off the couch, just sitting in one place crying. And I wasn't even necessarily sad. That was just basically what my body could do. My business, my everything, I couldn't show up that day. And it ended up that I couldn't show up for another 2 months. But it was really that very first day where I was like, wow, I thought I was doing all the things, and here I am, I was on the couch, I was listening to an audiobook about burnout, and it was basically saying, if you have these 4 symptoms, like, you need to absolutely stop what you are doing because you are endangering yourself and your body with stress. You're on your way to the hospital or worse. And I knew in my body, like, I just could not go on. I just could not keep moving forward feeling this crappy day in and day out. And if I thought I was going to be rejuvenated on that day and I couldn't even get up, then what did that mean for me? And that was actually like that was a really low moment, but that was actually a really pivotal moment because I realized that I couldn't go about it in the ways that every article or every book said. I had to figure out something that worked for me. I had to figure it out today. And that meant that I had to start with what I was really good at. And when I sat down and considered what I, really was successful at, I realized it had been getting creative and building systems and processes and translating abstract or confusing concepts into simple, clear, easy terms. And because I'm such a unique person, I basically had to apply that to all of this information, some of it very, dry, some of it not very, and a lot of it new. A lot of it was new science, new books. And I had to figure out a way to make it relevant to me and my people and that uniqueness. And so I decided to really simplify essentially the science of stress and self-regulation, for lack of a better term, that's a big umbrella, into like a practical system that told me what to do today. And that was the first kind of version of it. But it worked. I kept working on it until it did work. And I realized, holy cow, like this is magic. This is power. This is something that, for as terrible as I'd felt for so long, for years, decades, longer than I could remember. And I thought, I looked all these things that I thought were unrelated or individual, like, heads of the hydra to cut or problems to solve. I realized we're coming from this one thing, which was physiological stress, the existence of stress hormones in my body and the impact on all my systems and how that related to, context and society and people and all this stuff, and how it related to that hustle culture, that toxic set of practices that goes way, way deep, that I had yet to kind of face the big boss of, I think. And I realized that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring this to the world, and it was something I was going to be doing for myself. Spoiler alert, 2 years later, I'm still putting these things to work every day because, spoiler alert, the crap and stuff to deal with never stopped coming. If anything, it got worse. Yeah. But I've been able to actually grow stronger from it instead of just, as I like to say, a little bit more bitter and a lot more tired, which was what was going on before.
Yeah, I'd love to jump a bit more into the kind of business implications in and around stress and burnout. But before we do that, I'd love to at least kind of help our listeners understand a bit better on what exactly you do. Can you tell us a bit more about Grow Mighty Leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So Grow Mighty Leaders, as it exists today, is essentially digital training that simplifies the complicated, overwhelming science of self-regulation into simple, flexible, practical, actionable concepts that are kind of bite-sized. And it takes it and puts it through an inclusive lens because as I said, have a very unique context. I have a lot of different lenses piled on top as like a BIPOC, neurodivergent, queer woman. And the people around me, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different people. So we really take it and break it down into ways that anyone can apply and understand as long as they're willing to be uncomfortable and they're willing to do the work. Yeah, so I can get a bit more specific, but that's kind of the highest level.
Yeah, no, thanks for the explainer. Kind of diving back into a bit of what the impacts of your business have on your clients, but also the impact of seeing stress in your situation, in your own business. I think one thing that stands out that was interesting in what you talked about is when we think about hustle culture, a lot of us associate hustle with productivity. And we think that the harder we grind, the more productive we are. But we fail to also recognize that you need to be able to create space for quality time, and working more doesn't always mean better quality work that comes out of it. You've probably heard of the term diminishing returns. That the more you work on something, it doesn't always mean that your results or your returns are always going to be equal. I think that the good analogy behind that, is the idea behind, like, let's say if you run a food truck, having 2 chefs in your food truck, that might work. But if you have 20 chefs in your food truck, you have too many people trying to cook, right? So yeah, I love to hear like what insights or what kind of patterns you've seen in on the business front in terms
Mhm.
of, if they don't have good processes in place, what do they see happening? If they don't have good culture in place, what do they see happening with their employees and in and around that?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to speak to two different things that you said because I think they answer this question or expand it really well. And one is the idea of too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. And two is this idea of needing to have a strong culture just as much as strong processes. And I think that a lot of the time when most of us go through life and go into business, and I think it's important to say that I speak often from a human or an individual perspective because, we're the same human at work or at home, actually. We might be kind of tapping into different parts of ourselves. But even though I work primarily through kind of a work and business lens, I find that we often end up talking about the human level, and we do end up talking about what's going on kind of in your head and at home, because that is the context that is feeding into your day to day at work. But anyway, so back to this idea of too many cooks in the kitchen. So a lot of us have this idea that freedom is freedom from constraint.
Mm,
And I think that that is sometimes we need to get a little bit more specific because constraints can look a lot of different ways. And the truth is that effective, planned, strategic constraints are actually the thing that fuels creativity and growth and innovation. But you have to be able to guide people with a structure to lift people up, not kind of crush them and keep them in a box that doesn't allow them to kind of move and apply their unique context and their own magical, flexible brain to it as it applies to them. Because we are all humans, but we're different. And so
mhm,
what happens if we don't have structure of some kind, or if we don't have the appropriate and the most meaningful structure, is that it does become like that too many cooks in a kitchen experience. It
mm,
becomes like, okay, if we have, and actually for that matter, too much structure becomes like that too, because things become so busy on either end. If we don't know what we're doing and we have to make it up every single time, then that's exhausting. It's
mm,
hard to really grow and tap into the magic of rhythms and patterns to be able to build something better from looking at what we've already done. It
mm,
also puts us in the situation of sometimes never fully finishing everything because so many people in a food truck, as you can imagine, might be getting a lot of like a little bit done here and there. But one person who really understands the layout, or even two people, they're going to be able to bring something from beginning to end efficiently.
mm,
And that really matters, not just for, and I'm using finger quotations here, productivity, but for our brains that have to process it all, and our hearts that have to carry and care about the things that we do, and the various other things that are applying to our lens every day.
yeah.
So that brings me to the second thing. And that second thing is what I actually think of in terms of a symbol when I think of the idea of growing mighty, which is this issue that I saw. That story that I just said, wasn't the end of the story. I had this wonderful, magical feeling of inspiration, and then, I fucked it up pretty bad. But one of the things that became immediately apparent and that has been consistent from before the moment of that vision through to today is that we tend to focus a lot of productivity and not a lot on our capacity. And the way I look at it is like a tree. When I think of something mighty, growing mighty, I live in a temperate rainforest here in British Columbia, and UBC, right? That rainforest was right in my backyard as I was going to school. And what I found was, these trees, we look at them and we see their huge trunks. We see their leaves, their yield, the things that they create, the things that above the ground. But they need to have trunks that basically roots that are basically the size of trunks in order to
Mhm,
nourish that. And if they don't have those roots, which sometimes you get a peek at, but a lot of the time you don't see, then that tree is going to get pretty top heavy. It's going to fall. It's going to end up with diminishing returns. It's not going to be able to sustain it. And I remember this all the time and remind myself of it actively all the time because we understand this when it comes to a tree. I think a lot of us understand it. But when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to actually like managing ourselves and our capacity and what we're creating, why is it so freaking hard to understand, believe, and trust that yes, we have needs, yes, they are essential, and that our productivity is only going to give us diminishing returns unless we are nourishing it from those roots, not just quality time, but making sure that our mental, emotional, spiritual, social, and body state, like the literal human suit that we're in, are getting what they need to be regulated. Then each of us is the same kind of ticking time bomb that I was in one form or another, as I ended up seeing, as I tried to put this into the world. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Does that answer your question? I know that was very long.
Yes, I think it does. And I really like your kind of viewpoint on how constraints can both help alleviate the mental burden, but also encourage creativity. And if I try to put an analogy to it, in line with the too many cooks in the kitchen piece, is if you look at, like, let's say, cooking competitions and shows, they don't just say like, hey, cook whatever you want, right? They say, hey, this is the team, you can use these ingredients. When you have those constraints in place, then it makes it easier for the team or the cooks or the chefs to kind of figure out, okay, based on my available resources, how can I piece things together in a creative way? And I think it's especially relevant because I often hear from especially creative people who are in spaces where they have to write a lot of content, where they're, producing content, maybe it's musical pieces, art pieces, or maybe it's even business related content, that they often run into, writer's block, and they get stressed out about that. And they try to figure out like, how can I deal with all of this push to release and create more content while I still feel like I'm struggling to come up with content to begin with. So yeah, I think it's quite a meaningful angle. I'm curious to hear, because you're starting to talk a bit about the culture and kind of the personal piece. Do you have any advice in and around like processes, systems, or things that you can put in place to encourage a healthy company culture that is mindful of, sort of that burnout and overwork kind of situation?
Yeah. Now this is really the question, I think, because learning is one thing, putting it into action is another. And there is such a deeply, deeply entrenched culture or set of expectations, whether it's conscious or subconscious, about what success looks like. And it is basically sacrificing, using your body as a tool and running it into the ground the way, you would not do with your expensive tools if you wanted them to last. But sometimes even if people want to change, and I mean this both from a worker lens and a leader lens, and as entrepreneurs, we're both, I think that it can be really, really tough, even when you want to. I set the value in my business that we all agreed with, this idea of radical wellness years ago, because we realized that we had to be radical to kind of overcome the challenges in ourselves. But it really wasn't until even this moment that I'm talking about, because that was years before that, that I was able to start to put some kind of processes and systems. So let me kind of simplify. I'm going to talk about how to look at it, and then just like something that you could do right now type thing. Now, in terms of how to look at it, I look at it, coming back to the idea of growing mighty, that we need to grow mighty inside as well as out. And we can't just pick one, we need to be nourishing those roots as well as our yield. But there is stuff that we can do on both sides. And while often people are ruthlessly neglecting the inside part because they don't know, you can set processes and learn skills just like you can with everything else, but there's just a lot of misinformation out there. And sometimes, you need to make some changes around who it is that you're surrounding yourself with. So I think, first of all, understanding that you need to approach it from internal as well as out. And yes, I mean you in a work context, because if you have people that are leading others that are not doing any kind of work on their internal resources and capacities, then you might get someone who really succeeds, but it's either going to be luck or it's going to have a time limit on it, or both. And that is just like what I have seen again and again. I'm hoping that will change. In fact, I'm working to make that change as the baseline, but we're not there yet. The other thing is realizing on that outside piece, we all hear about, oh yeah, processes and systems. And I hear, especially from a lot of creatives, oh yeah, I really want that, but it feels impossible. So sometimes making a few simple gains here just to create rhythm and predictability to things that you do. Like, for example, having a rolling agenda for meetings that are happening consistently, or looking at your processes from a top-down lens. And what I mean by that is looking at, okay, for us to accomplish something for someone, whether that's creating a thing or whether that's delivering a service, what if we had to break it down into 6 steps or less, what would that be? And starting to look at processes in 6 steps or less, fill in the details, as opposed to trying to kind of document every little piece. And those will give you some big wins. But coming to the inside piece, that's where there's really a lot of potential. And the good news and the bad news is that you, whether you are worker, leader, or both as entrepreneur, the path is the same, which is to lead by example and to set clear expectations and meet them with consistent experiences. And leading by example means that you probably need to do some work to understand where you're at, your own regulation levels, understanding what some of your body cues are when you're stressed. What are things that happen in your body that are recognizable? Maybe making a list of what you do when you're stressed, or how you approach your capacity day to day, and then maybe make a list of things that work and help for making you feel better when you're stressed or managing your capacity day to day. Compare them. They're probably not the same list. If they are, do it again, because you wouldn't need to make the list if they were the same, basically. So, if you're getting the same list, then dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
So these are all, as I said, it's a blend of kind of how to look at it, because I believe that mindset is critical, and a few kind of things that you can do to take action and actually start doing that. But just know that it's a marathon, not a race. It's something that we get better at over time, and we inspire others by doing it. Doesn't matter if you have all the best processes in the world. If you're not doing the work, your team will take your lead.
Interesting. I'd like to talk a bit more on that sort of authentically leading by example piece, but quickly, I want to get your thoughts on, kind of, I don't know if this is superficial, but sometimes you see organizations doing things like, forced vacations, or if you look at Netflix, where they have a open vacation policy where anyone can take time off anytime that they want to. What are your thoughts on those kind of initiatives? Are they actually effective? Do they actually backfire? Have you seen anything in and around that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think when it comes to any protocol or policy or kind of process that I'm putting into place, I always like to work in the order of the people, and then the process, and then the tools to execute it. And what I mean by that is talk to your people, because I can speak to what I've seen, but just the very act of talking to your people, whoever those people are, and understanding kind of what they need and are interested in, already starts to create a safe space for this, because you're genuinely showing, not just telling, that you're thinking about this, that this matters. So I'm going to give some more specific, I'm going to talk more specifically, but just keep that in mind. Talk to your people. Don't just go off of what I'm saying dogmatically or without that step. And I'm actually very for those kinds of policies when appropriately applied. I perceive that, as I've said, you can't policy your way into success alone. You still need to be willing to be uncomfortable. You need to be flexible doing the work. You need to talk to people, sometimes have hard conversations. And it does remove a level of predictability and comfort to the way things are done, almost always, because these are really deeply ingrained habits. That being said, I think when mindfully applied, talking about enforced vacation, that is something that I would not use necessarily lightly, but definitely have found to be critical. Different ways of doing this can really vary. So, we have a 4-day week. Our team works 32 hours, which they actually get more done and are happier a lot of the time to show up to work because that works for us, in the sense that having that whole extra day to just rest, recover. We tend to be people who need a lot of rest that I work with very closely on my team. And I'm just a huge proponent for that in general. That is in some ways an enforced vacation. But we also have active conversations. If somebody is showing us cues that they are approaching burnout, I have learned that it is probably worse than you're noticing, because you're only noticing the symptoms that are kind of showing up a lot of the time. A lot of the time we manage to successfully push down our symptoms, even to ourselves before that.
Good point.
And there's limited things you can do, and they may or may not be successful, but that is definitely one of them. I found that having a conversation and empowering other people to choose a vacation, even if it's very soon, is often effective, just because I value agency. And I think people acting within their agency, I always want to empower people to lift themselves up rather than think that I am personally going to hold up all these people. And the other thing you said, infinite vacation, that is something that, I don't know, is perhaps not an official policy with my team, but that we also do. We do infinite kind of mental health days or sick days, in the sense that we would much prefer that somebody take the time, and we then have other responsibilities. We need to screen far more specifically to have the right people who have the right values that align with ours, that are going to motivate themselves. We need to make sure that we understand the outcomes, so that we have a way to gauge success. That's not just, did you show up today? And all of that works with the type of business that I run, where we are producing things and doing training and consulting and, creating digital products and that sort of a thing. So we work fully remote, and that works for us. But we have found that these things tend to go deep. So even in other people that we've worked with, sometimes those kinds of policies can be the difference between establishing safety and kind of helping people get the muscle memory to start to do it themselves and kind of build up momentum, because it makes it very clear. A lot of people are afraid of mixed expectations. Oh yeah, we're being told that we value rest and all of this, but what happens if I have to miss a day last minute, or, something gets delayed? I think people want to work and they want to do a good job fundamentally. And if they don't, it's because there's something wrong there. There's a mismatch there. Maybe wrong isn't the right word, but there's something going on there. I think that we're naturally predisposed to want to be part of something bigger and create, but there's a lot of mismatching.
Yeah, a lot in that. And I think I really resonate with your angle in and around like finding employees that are aligned on your organizational values. And I want to tease kind of that a bit further apart. So one thing interesting on the topic of infinite vacations is like with Netflix, I think the kind of the struggle that a lot of people see from the outside is, on one front, it could potentially backfire, and there are certain people who end up in a situation where they feel uncomfortable taking the vacation because they don't want to be seen as taking advantage of it. So like you say, making sure it's you're encouraging people to talk about it, you're normalizing it so that people feel comfortable taking it if they need to take it, right?
Yes, and the word safe, I just want to put it out there that the word safe specifically is a word that I've heard from teammates, from partners we work with, from clients. It's a word that, I don't know, I maybe felt uncomfortable with before, but that's a word that comes up, especially in the context of being an employer, making people feel safe. But you also need to take vacations and do it yourself.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the authentic leadership piece. So I'll jump into that in a second. But before I do that quickly, and another one that also stood out to me was your point on the value alignment piece is that relates back to that infinite vacation policy thing. Is oftentimes some people worry like, oh, what if I have employees that take advantage of that situation and end up just slacking and trying to get paid for it, kind of thing. Which, to your point, I believe very strongly in the same ethos as well, where if you hire the right people who believe in your company, who share the same values as you, like you say, they will want to work for you. So I'm basically repeating your words, but I think it's worth some emphasis, because I believe people want to do good work. They don't just want to be unproductive. And like you say, it's not that they're unproductive because there's something wrong with them, but oftentimes it is because there is a misalignment somewhere. They're not generally bad
Absolutely.
people, but maybe they're not a fit for your organization. Maybe they're fit somewhere else. And, you know, it's also your duty to make that uncomfortable decision if they're not a fit, to let them go, because it not only benefits you, but it will also benefit them as well.
Absolutely. And growing mighty on the outside is understanding, okay, this is where the issue might be. You know, it could be skills fit, could be values fit, could be expectations fit. But growing mighty on the inside is being willing to have that hard conversation and not putting it off and knowing what to say. And so I'm just bringing this up again, just to tie it in and just give a real literal example to why it's important and why it's so powerful to really look at things holistically in that way, both for yourself and for your team.
Mm-hmm. I guess back on the topic in and around the leader, him and or herself or themselves working on their own development. One thing that kind of I often see, not only in and around culture building on the mental wellness and hustle side, but also like with the recent interest around building diverse teams, diverse cultures, and building inclusion as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you say is very true. A lot of leaders try to focus so much on more on the structural elements, but less on working on it themselves. So I'd love to hear, what have you seen that kind of, do you have any tips or tricks to share around like personal wellness and dealing with stress? Like do you see people doing
I
things
just
on
want
their
to do you want me to look through the lens of personal wellness and dealing with stress, or building inclusivity, or both?
I think we can speak a bit on both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the good news is is that they're both kind of the same path or the same conversation, in the sense that I think we really need to start, and things didn't really change for me, and they don't really change for other people that I work with or see or even just talk to, until you start to be able to discern the difference between discomfort and pain. And this is something that I kind of made up, in the sense that this is gathered from all the stuff that I've learned, but looking at it through this lens was something that I came to that really helped me click, because I spent most of my time thinking that discomfort was just tiny pain. And I'd spent so much time pushing myself, I kind of thought on some level the world was pain. You know, there was a certain amount of pain inherent in anything that I wanted to do because life was outside my comfort zone. And now the problem with this, which I call the tolerance path, you know, setting my limits at the edge of what I could tolerate, is that it became really, really difficult to measure, even internally, when what I was doing was actually being successful or contributing to the problem. And I think this is something that I see both in the lens of building resilience or navigating stress or burnout, you know, but it's also something that I see as a person of color and an Indigenous person, when I see people, well-intentioned people who are good people, trying to build diversity and inclusive spaces, which is kind of mooshing the two together, because in actuality, discomfort is not a tiny version of pain, at least not how I define it. Discomfort is a potentially unpleasant experience that's taking us in the direction of our goals and will ease over time. And pain, even tiny pain, is something that ultimately, even if it feels like it's helping, if we trace it out on a timeline, it is only going to be us walking the tolerance path. It's just going to basically get bigger or endure or change and get worse. And that they're actually 0 and 1. And discomfort is something that is necessary. It is, in fact, the path to pretty much anything that's new that we want to achieve, but especially when it comes to strong leadership, building inclusive spaces, and body regulation, as I've come to call it, because in the end, we experience everything through our body, even our emotions, even our brain.
Yeah.
And I find that just starting to ask myself, is this discomfort or is this pain when I'm experiencing something unpleasant? it's like a little game, and I find I love playing. Like I love kind of looking at these things through the lens of a game because it kind of takes the pressure off, and it started to recode my brain. Like, for example, something that I would have said one of my biggest sources of pain might have been I can think of something from personal context, let's say like singing in front of people. On a business context, maybe letting go of someone that, I can see as a good fit in some ways, but maybe not in others.
Mm,
And both of those experiences are experiences that I know a lot of people can relate to that I previously coded as pain. But as
mm,
soon as I started to play this game and ask myself this question, I realized, oh, actually, those experiences are both discomfort. They might be big discomfort, like singing in
mhm,
front of someone, or even just practicing singing out loud. But if I want to become an awesome singer and really love my voice, that is the only way. I need
mm,
to be willing to sing, maybe not in front of people, but I want to be able to, jam with musician friends. So that is the way. Similarly, if I want to achieve a goal or to even have harmony within my team or to make sure that everyone is aligned and motivated effectively, sometimes it is important to let someone go. And it is just even years and years in and on my second business, it's still one of the hardest, crappiest feelings.
mhm.
Uh, but it is often the gateway. Like I have in the past, I have chosen to suffer for months, asking myself, is this what needs to happen? Putting it off, giving chances, all this stuff, to the point where it did affect the team. It did affect the outcomes, and maybe that letting a person go was 72 hours of like hell and anxiety. But at that point, we're both free. And if I thought that that person wasn't feeling the edge of that, whether in other people or with me, then I was kidding myself for
Mhm.
sure. Because as you said, sometimes it does lead to something better, but being able to discern that and the
Yeah,
tiny pains, the things that feel like, oh, I can shove this down, but when you play the timeline out, you're like, ooh, that's never going to get better.
yeah.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that we're getting into the nuances around like the definition of like pain and discomfort. And I'll give you an analogy to help you kind of understand where I'm coming from too, because I like you also strongly believe that linguistics and the meanings that we put behind things greatly shape our psyche.
Yes.
And one example I can think of here is, you say like discomfort and pain, they sound very similar, but if I think of another two terms that also can be implicated in a very similar way is, the difference between being kind and being nice. In
Oh,
your
yes, that is gold. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I was calling it the cult of nice, but the way that you put
Mhm.
it, I think really adds the weight of that context, and
Yeah.
clarifies it. Yeah.
And to give an example there, it's like, let's say if you notice someone um has, let's say a colleague has terrible body odor, uh, oftentimes we avoid that discomfort or pain, and we tend to default to avoiding situations where we can potentially arise any form of conflict, and we just don't bring it up, and we think, okay, we're being nice people because we're not shoving it in the face, kind of thing, right?
Mm.
But if you are truly kind, then it's not so much about having the right answer, but being mindful of not only bringing it up, but also how it will be received by the recipient. So you're doing your best to actually raise it in such a way where you help the person understand, like, oh, this is a situation I've noticed. Here's how you can improve. And I'm not saying it to put you in a bad position or kind of like shine the spotlight on you, but I want to make sure that you're aware, if in case you're not already aware, kind of thing. So I find that at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
okay to make mistakes. Same with initiatives in and around diversity and inclusion. It's okay to not get everything right. We don't all have the answers, but authentically and meaningfully trying to take that step towards making progress. I think that's what matters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, in the situation that you described, it might initially seem like those things are, I'm just going to bring it back to kind of that discomfort and pain in the sense that you're like, oh, it might be unpleasant
Hmm.
to bring it up in some way, whether, it you think it isn't going to go well, or you just don't have a lot of energy or something like that. But if this is something that is coming up again and again, and you're not bringing it up, that's actually where the true pain lies. And I think that something that I see very, very often, which is usually, I think, one of the best places to start, especially as a leader in a work context, is to look at things and ask yourself, where am I choosing pain to avoid discomfort? Where am I
Mm.
choosing sometimes big pain over the long term to avoid what might actually be a small discomfort? And actually having that conversation, as long as your intention, as you said, is actually to lift them up through it, it really benefits both of you. And the next time you try to bring something up to somebody like that, it's probably going to get a little bit easier after you do it a few times. And that's the power of discomfort, is that it's not just that it's going to get easier, but it's actually what I call a regenerative system. You're going to get more than you put in over time, because that person, you and them, just had an authentic moment. Maybe that is going to help them in bigger ways that you can anticipate. And maybe that's actually going to form a deeper bond or help you work together in some way. It's not always, sometimes it is quantifiable. A lot of the time it is not. But I really look to kind of go beneath the symptoms of, okay, this feels unpleasant or unpleasant to even think about, and ask myself, what kind of unpleasantness is it? And am I going to actually take on a deeper, more long-term or consistent form of unpleasantness to avoid something that actually is going to give back more than I put in?
Yeah, and to kind of elaborate on that, your mention of long-term versus short-term also kind of sparked another connection here. Is oftentimes people, when it comes to implementing new things or even systems, they avoid that discomfort in and around trying something new, because they feel that there is, in the short term, maybe not as much reward, or there's a lot of discomfort around learning something new, trying something new. But in doing so, they're unconsciously sitting in more long-term pain. So
exactly.
yeah, like one thing I can think of is, let's say, for
Deep knots.
example, yeah, like let's say hiring and training an employee. Some people try to do everything all on their own because they feel like, if I have to hire someone, I got to train someone from scratch. They don't have the experience, but they're not thinking about the long-term outcomes. Like, yes, the new employee might not be as good as you right now, but if given the right time and attention, they will eventually be able to take on more work from you, and maybe even become better than you are at whatever they're supposed to be doing. And that therefore then frees up more of your time and your mental capacity as well.
Exactly. It's the same thing when it comes to body regulation. And by the way, the words regulation and dysregulation, just to touch on what you said about how language is so important, I have to say the word dysregulation changed my life, because before that I used words like grumpy, angry. And I realized that just with these words, I could just get more specific and understand sometimes that there's something that needs correction. We all know that if we don't sleep for a few days, or if we sleep poorly for a few days, we're probably going to have some symptoms like being a little bit snappier, thinking a little bit slower. And it's not necessarily that these are emotional in themselves. These are just the impacts of that input. So wait, where was I going with that? Let me just pull my brain back. I feel like I could, I love talking about this stuff. Right. So we were talking about this idea of bringing someone on and feeling kind of more comfortable ultimately, even if it brings you long-term pain, to kind of do everything yourself instead of getting through the discomfort of training someone, maybe them not being the right fit, going through the hiring process, having to figure out systems, that sort of a thing. I think this applies really, really well when it comes to our regulation, when it comes to our bodies. Because if we ignore our body cues, if we just push through that tiredness or that stress or that emotional exhaustion, we're technically showing up. But that energy has to come from somewhere. And each of us only has so much stamina day to day. And if we pull too much, if we kind of overdraw it and pull from our core reserves when we need rest, then that's going to mean that we're actually not having the reserves to top our stamina up every day. So, which brings us back to that kind of diminishing returns. And so it can feel really uncomfortable, especially to rest. And, key topic number one, like the number one rule of achieving mightiness on the inside, is reclaiming rest and almost like relearning what rest is, what your cues are, and what is actually needed to regulate that. Because it is one of the hardest and one of the most uncomfortable still to this day. Like, my team has to cheer me on to take rest, but the work that I produce, I literally gain more than that amount of time. Sometimes I have to take uncomfortable amounts of rest, but when I come back and do the thing,
Hmm.
It happens so much faster, so much better, so much more effectively. But it takes pushing through that discomfort. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, resting is like true rest, not just like taking a bath or something.
Hmm.
I mean, for some people, maybe that is, but not for everybody. True
Yeah.
rest, very uncomfortable.
Mm. I think this is a good point to kind of shift gears to focus in and around more of the personal elements. I love to hear your thoughts on, you mentioned inputs, you mentioned rest. Um, have you seen any kind of good processes or boundaries or habits to build a break that will help kind of give you the right positive inputs and help you avoid those negative inputs? Like an example I can think of is you know, taking cold showers. And the
Mm,
science behind that is they talk about by putting yourself or your body in situations where you are physically stressed, but in a safe situation. What happens then is your body develops a higher tolerance for being in that kind of or reacting to cortisol and stress, and therefore that helps increase your natural tolerance for any regular kind of the small stress events that we constantly get on a daily basis.
yeah,
Another one I can think of is people talking about setting boundaries around work life, right? Like
yeah.
when you're on vacation, taking time off, but at the same time, like making sure, like, is it healthy to completely shut things off, or do you need to find some sort of other comfort level somewhere else? Like, what have you
Yeah,
seen?
yeah. So this is a great question because I think this touches on the heart of the gap between all the information out there and putting it into practice.
Hmm.
Because I think I'm not alone when I say that there's just so many different things to potentially do.
Mm.
And I know that for me and for a lot of people that I speak to and work with, it gets to the point where juggling all those different things on a symptomatic level and thinking, okay, if I just do this and do that,
Mm.
it ends up being dangerous in two ways. One is that the things considering, planning, fitting in, motivating yourself to do, and organizing all the things that you're doing to de-stress or to become more resilient to stress actually stresses you out more, which because stress exists on a body level and is separate from the outside things stressing us out, that
Mm.
means that we can't just check a box here. We can't just say, okay, if I do this thing, it will have this result and that will apply to everybody. That being said, it can get surprisingly mechanical because what I found was critical for me, and I think is really, and I'm genuinely not saying this, oh, just to like plug my thing. You can probably tell from the way I say this that I really did create this and use it every single day because it works. So it's the language I naturally go to because I created it to make it absorbable because I was so overwhelmed. And the way I look at it in terms of building resilience through that lens is we need to break down and communicate why these different things are important and how they're important, and that will allow people to equip themselves to understand whether or not it's going to work for them, and kind of they need a structure or constraint to try it in a safe way.
Mm.
So the way I look at it, and this is the way that we teach, is 3 steps, but very much like reduce, reuse, recycle. It's really a circle that you need to move through, as I like to think of it, missions in each of these categories in order as often as possible to gain kind of the muscle memory, to gain the strength and the skills.
Hmm.
And within each of those, there's 5. And so far, all of the things that you said fit into kind of one of those categories. And I
Mm.
would consider the specific things you're talking about, like, for example, cold showers, which to me fits into lesson 2 of reclaiming rest, toning your vagus nerve, which is there's actually a nerve that controls this stress response. And there are things that we can do that can make it stronger, often simple things like singing or cold showers. I don't know, more simple for some people than others.
Mm.
Even meditating or resonating, oming our vocal cavity
Hmm.
that can, yes, have a positive impact. But some of them are going to work for some people.
Yep.
Some of them are absolutely not, or are going to stress them out or make them worse.
Mm.
And it's more important to be able to kind of absorb and understand why it might work so that
Mm.
you have a way to apply it and it's not just so you have a way to apply it, but then it's another thing is to understand how to apply it in a way that's not overwhelming, that's flexible, that you can play with and that you can grow with over time.
Yeah.
So I can speak to, the other one you mentioned, but that's kind of my higher level answer.
Yeah. No, thanks for saying that. I think that kind of gives me my kind of response to the second one, which is on the work-life balance part. What I tie into what you said is that everyone has a different style that works for them, and it's more important to not apply it for the sake of applying it, these practices, these habits, but really to understand what will work, why it works, and what works for you. Because like the example I can think here of is I often hear a lot around like setting boundaries around work-life balance. And for myself, I don't know why, but for myself, that doesn't apply. And for myself, I actually find another term that actually resonates better with me, which is work-life harmony. And in my case, not being too strict around setting strict boundaries and kind of saying like, oh, if I'm on vacation, I'm not allowed to look at my company stuff. I'm not allowed to work. If I set those strict boundaries, like you say, it actually stresses me out more if I try too hard to enforce that habit. And by actually just saying it's okay, it's okay to be on a vacation and at the same time want to work if you want to. And that actually, I find helps reduce my stress, even though I'm still doing some work on vacation, but it is a lesser amount of work, but still like not trying to force yourself into a specific box just because people say like, oh, you have to do it this way.
Yeah. That is critical. And I actually want to pull out something that you said, is that what I'm hearing is that you're gauging the success and kind of using to douse and understand what works more or less for you. You're using your actual stress levels. We could get into some of the ways that you kind of recognize and measure stress, because for some people, including myself, that's off. But I think that's really important, because when I first created these systems, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm invincible, and went back and started working 80 hours a week. And I maintained it for a while until I lost one of the key habits. And I didn't realize how critical it was. And all of a sudden, I had kind of confused working with it was like I had a broken leg. This is how I think of it. I had a broken leg. I had discovered how to put a cast on it, and it was great, but I mistook the cast for actually having a healed leg. So I started running on a broken leg, which was a bad call. And I made things way worse for myself. I think that the critical piece that really clued me in, because I was running headlong into pain, but calling it discomfort. I didn't have that terminology at that time. That's one of the reasons I start with that now. But it was actually figuring out what success looks like, figuring out, okay, what does it look like on a body level, setting some cues, some measurable stuff around that, actually rating my symptoms and seeing how they were changing. And until I did that, I really sometimes thought I was doing things that would ease my stress when it was actually the opposite. So I just wanted to pull that out of what you said, is there is the part that's, okay, you made some changes, you had to find something that worked for you, you had to kind of shift it around. And I can give a very kind of high level process for people who are trying to figure that out, but figuring, okay, that's great, how do I do that? But I think the critical thing to mention is always start with just marking down where you're at. There are problems or symptoms you want to change, rate them out of 10, write the date, make a list, write them out of 10, write the date on there, just put some sort of record down. And I encourage you not just to work with the symptoms, but with what success looks like for you, because this is what brings me back to us just being in our human machines, both at work and at home. We can measure. I like to say that regulation success is the output, not the input. I like to think that I can just wake up one day and put in more regulation, just pull that out of nowhere. But the truth is that how you're showing up at home and at work is going to tell you a lot. And the lens that I look at it through is what is your stamina, your kind of daily reserve of energy? How is that working relative to what's going on in your day? Are you running out and, feeling overstimulated or just burnt or overtired or something before you're ready? Or is it the opposite, where maybe not so much for our audience, but where you're really feeling understimulated and bored and like you have so much more to give, but it's going into things maybe that are self-destructive because it's not being used in a way that's really giving you life, so to speak. And then the other thing is look at your reserves. Look at what your body's doing. Look at how it's changed over time. Stop thinking about it in terms of this specific symptom, that specific symptom for a moment, and just notice, have you been dipping into your reserves? For how long? How deep into your reserves? How can you tell, And those are some of the best success metrics I've found. We can start to look at other things, like we can put it your filters for the world, your emotional, mental, physical, social, environmental filters. Are they overloaded? Are they needing time to regroup? Are you having trouble thinking? There's these things that we can look through and kind of simplify it in that way. But in the end, that's what it comes down to, work or home. Are you doing stuff that gives you meaning, and are you recharging both your reserves and your daily fuel, so to speak?
Great. I'm mindful of time and I want to be respectful as well, but I want to get your take on one last piece before we wrap up. Because humans are social creatures, do you have any advice around building supportive networks that will help you kind of work through or handle these kind of stress and burnout situations?
Yes. Number one, the way is dark and full of terrors. You cannot go it alone. A lot of us have been taught that independence and being able to control everything ourselves is the way, and that's where true strength lies. But actually being able to appropriately build support networks, which often, once you start to do it intentionally, means like letting some people go and cultivating others. It's terrifying. In the end, nobody can do the work for you. But we are social creatures. We are wired to be parts of a larger community. So when I look at things, we interact socially through how we reclaim rest. There's reclaiming rest, reducing stressors, and unpacking baggage. Those are the three we need to do again and again. So through the lens of reclaiming rest, we need people who celebrate our rest around us, people who are going to help us protect our rest, help us check in when we're doing things that are maybe maladaptive, that feel good, but aren't actually helping. They're making things worse. They're painful. Through the lens of reducing stressors, we need other people to help us reframe success, to help us build rhythms and routines, to be able to delegate appropriately, to set boundaries. Even if you are healing stuff that's happened to you, a lot of the time I found that you can't kind of unpack a piece of baggage or even sometimes envision something a different way until you see or conceive of someone else or something else that has achieved it and what it looks like. And last, in terms of unpacking baggage, and this is the biggest one in terms of building support networks, because we want to be looking for the people who do this in all three categories, is that we need to establish safety. And both at work, at home, the people we spend our time with, it's said, we're a combination of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Are those people creating emotional safety in the sense that you can be a human and be imperfect and it's okay? Do you have literal safety? Sometimes that can look like a community, being part of something bigger. For me, understanding that I was autistic and had ADHD was not a box, but a connection to a bigger community who knew what it was like to experience my life. And that's so powerful. And last but not least, through that lens, when we're establishing safety, we need people who are going to challenge us in a positive way and help us discern, when it's important to choose courage over comfort, both in ourselves and others. And that's something, we haven't touched on, but is really huge, and something to, leave your listeners with is that idea of courage. True courage is setting boundaries, vulnerability, taking rest, understanding your values, being part of something bigger, creating meaning, and all of those things require discomfort. So look for people and build support networks. Yes, that can be therapists, friends, chosen family, bosses, coworkers. So many different people can build these support networks. Pros can be really helpful, but only if they too are choosing courage over comfort and qualifying for some of these things that I've said and going to actually help you lift you up and establish safety. You might need to take a break from other people. That's part of building important support networks. It's just as much about saying no sometimes to spending time with people as it is to saying yes. But you can't go it alone. You need.
Thank you for sharing, Sarah. I find it a bit ironic and funny that we are ending the note on stress about choosing courage and discomfort. But I think it's the healthy kind of discomfort, making sure that you are comfortable with change and looking for new ways to push yourself out of those painful situations by
Oh
being in
yeah,
discomfort.
stress is
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah.
Suffering can be really comfortable.
Yeah. Great. To wrap it up, if people would like to learn more about you or Grow Mighty Leaders, where can they find out more?
Absolutely. So this is something that we're still building and developing. The short answer is growmightyleaders.com. We do training, both kind of live and more like group style stuff. But the thing that we're really building is easy to absorb mini courses through an inclusive lens that build puzzle pieces of the stuff that we're talking about. They all build on each other, but you can learn to grow mighty outside one little bite size at a time, or you can learn to grow mighty outside or inside by putting them together and taking it as something that's longer and more involved. So that's still coming out, but that's where to find me and what you'll find there.
All right. Thank you again for your time. It was a pleasure having you.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure. Really great questions. I really appreciated being able to go deep on these things.